Can you imagine fighting all your life to reach the top of Formula One, and just when you do it with a new team, you are knocked down from the desk with absurd decisions? That is exactly what happened to Lewis Hamilton in Mexico 2025. Are we witnessing a systematic injustice against one of the greatest of all time? The 2025 Mexican Grand Prix has left a mark that will not be easily erased. And not because of the typical emotion that is experienced at the Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez, but because of a decision that has shaken the foundations of modern Formula One. At the epicenter of the scandal, Lewis Hamilton. The most successful driver in history, in his new challenge with Ferrari, ended up being the protagonist not because of his talent, but because of a punishment that many already describe as a historical injustice. The 10-second penalty imposed by the FIA fell like a bomb. He was accused of gaining a lasting advantage by leaving the track at turn 4 and rejoining without losing position. What could have been resolved with a strategic return of place, as has been done dozens of times in the past, turned into a penalty that ruined his entire race. And the worst thing was not the punishment itself, but the context in which it was applied. During those first laps of the race, at least 3 drivers performed similar maneuvers. Charles Leclerc, his own teammate, missed the first corner chicane after a contact with Hamilton himself and did not receive any penalty. Max Verstappen also left the track on multiple occasions, aggressively cutting corners and rejoining without losing position, and he was not penalized either. The difference in criteria in practically identical decisions makes the penalty against Hamilton not only seem excessive, but also targeted. The consequences were devastating. The British driver, who started third and with enough pace to fight for the podium, fell to 14th place after serving the pit penalty. From there, he could only climb to 8th position, adding a handful of points that do not reflect either his performance or the real potential of his career that day. But beyond the sporting result, what remained was a bitter feeling. A fracture in the trust of one of the most influential drivers towards the institution that should guarantee the fairness of the competition. And this feeling is not just Hamilton. Social networks, former pilots, experts, and even some members of the paddock said it openly. This was an outrage. A punishment that comes just when Hamilton was beginning to gain traction in his new home, when Ferrari was once again sounding strong at the front of the grid, when fans were hoping to see a multi-time champion fighting face to face with the greats again. This episode has exposed a wound that Formula One has not been able to heal. The perception that the rules are applied with different criteria depending on the name you wear on your helmet. And when that perception is accompanied by such clear facts, the impact not only damages a driver or a team, but erodes the sport's credibility with millions of viewers around the world. What happened on lap 6 of the 2025 Mexican Grand Prix was not just a racing incident. It was the epicenter of a chain of decisions that would end up staining the integrity of the result and questioning the regulatory coherence of the FIA. At first glance, it may seem like just another moment of aggressive jockeying for positions, but when each element is carefully dissected, an uncomfortable truth is revealed. What was considered an infringement by Lewis Hamilton was, at the very least, a debatable decision. At most, a clear example of arbitrariness. That moment in the race, Hamilton was in full battle with Max Verstappen for third position. The Red Bull driver attempted an extremely ambitious overtaking maneuver in the first corner, darting around the inside with little margin and forcing both of them to leave the track. That is, both Hamilton's car and Verstappen's car exceeded the track limits. They both cut the chicane completely, and yet only one received punishment later. The serious thing about this sequence is not only the action itself, but what came after. In turn 4, while defending himself from the pressure of the Dutchman, Hamilton lost grip, locked the front wheels, and, to avoid an impact, was forced to use the escape route. But instead of following the path set by the race director, a longer, slower route that included rejoining after a yellow line, he cut across the grass, shortening the route, and rejoining just in front of Verstappen, thus maintaining his original position. The stewards determined that although he did not violate the race director's safety directive because he was going too fast to safely follow the designated route, he did gain a lasting advantage by not losing position in the maneuver. That was the official justification for the penalty. But the problem does not lie only in this technical reading of the regulations. The real problem appears when this situation is compared to the actions of other drivers in that same race. Charles Leclerc, Hamilton's Ferrari teammate, also cut the track on the first lap, avoiding the entire chicane after a brush with Lewis himself. He re-entered maintaining his position and, however, did not receive any penalty. Verstappen, on several occasions during the first laps, extended the limits of the layout in key corners, also rejoining without giving up position. None of these actions were sanctioned. What difference was there between those maneuvers and Hamilton's? Was his action really so different that he deserved such a severe punishment that it destroyed his career? This is where the anatomy of the penalty begins to break down. Because if an infraction is penalized only when committed by a specific driver, while identical actions by others go unpunished, we are not facing a regulation, but rather a selective interpretation of it. And that is deeply damaging for any sport, but especially for one like Formula One, where every second, every centimeter, and every refereeing decision can make the difference between glory and humiliation. Furthermore, there's a psychological dimension that cannot be ignored. Hamilton is not a rookie. He is a 7-time world champion with more than 300 Grand Prix wins under his belt. When a driver of that caliber decides to cut a corner, it is because he evaluates the risk, the regulations, and the consequences. And he does so knowing that others, in similar circumstances, have gotten away with it. The FIA's decision not only sanctioned him on the track, but also planted a huge doubt in the minds of all the drivers. Can I trust that the rules will be applied consistently? It all started when Riccardo Adami, his race engineer, informed him over the radio, "We have a 10-second penalty for the incident at turn 4 with Verstappen. We don't agree." The 7-time champion's response was immediate and visceral. "That's bullshit, man. The grip is so small there. The grip there is so low." The choice of words was not casual, nor was it simply emotional. It was deliberate, loaded with meaning. At that moment, Hamilton was not only reacting to the punishment, he was questioning the credibility of those who made the decision. Throughout the next few laps, the tension did not dissipate. On the contrary, it grew like a flame that finds oxygen. Hamilton continued to question the sanction, but he did so with a lucidity that hurt even more than the punishment itself. "What about all the other cars that have cheated?" he asked over the radio. He did not speak in a vacuum. He was making direct reference to the movements of Charles Leclerc and Max Verstappen in the first laps. Both had cut corners, both had gained or maintained position by doing so, and yet neither was penalized. The cameras showed him silently in the box after the race, with his helmet still on, as if he did not want to face the face of injustice. In the post-race interview, his words were measured, but the anger was still latent. "I've done everything that's been asked of me. I've given everything. And yet, it seems there are those who decide that's not enough." That phrase, seemingly simple, contains an enormous symbolic load. Fred Vasseur, team director, appeared before the media with a serious face, almost restrained out of obligation. He knew that what he was going to say would have repercussions. His words were diplomatic, but each sentence revealed deep annoyance. He described the sanction as very, very harsh, and added that it was not very well managed. Behind this verbal moderation was a clear message: we do not understand, we do not share, and we do not accept the criteria applied against our pilot. For Ferrari, the situation was a strategic blow. They were coming off a promising start to the season. The SF25 had shown more consistent performance than in previous years. Hamilton, after a shorter adaptation period than expected, was beginning to extract real performance from the car. Classifying third in Mexico was no coincidence. It was the reflection of a millimeter of adjustment work between the driver, engineers, simulators, and race management. And that's why the penalty hurt twice as much, because it wasn't just a race penalty, it was a symbolic invalidation of all that accumulated effort. And if the situation was already complex from a sporting point of view, the institutional aspect ended up setting off alarm bells. Vasseur knows that a team like Ferrari, which has historically been questioned for its strategic errors, cannot also allow itself to be a victim of arbitrary external decisions. Ferrari is also quietly grappling with another dilemma: internal comparison. Charles Leclerc, in the same race, executed an almost identical maneuver in the first corner of the opening lap, cutting the entire chicane without any penalty. And although from the outside this may seem like an advantage for the team since one of its cars was not sanctioned, internally it generates dissonance. How do you manage the credibility of the regulations when your own drivers receive different treatment in similar situations? And they know that in Maranello. The engineers know it, Vasseur knows it, and John Elkann, president of the group, knows it. Because beyond the lost points, what is in danger is the project, the symbol, the narrative that Ferrari was Ferrari again. And if such an iconic team is perceived as a victim of external decisions, public and internal opinion can begin to collapse. That's why Vasseur was restrained but firm. He did not seek direct confrontation, but he did make it clear that they will not sit idly by. In the following hours, it was leaked that the team requested full access to the FIA's communications during the evaluation of the sanction, as well as the telemetric data of the other similar non-penalized maneuvers. They want proof, they want consistency, and above all, they want to send a message to their fans. They will not allow their prominence to be taken away from them for reasons beyond the control of the track. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.